Welcome to the show. Tonight, this government hands out visas to even Palestinians from terrorist-run Gaza. No problem. Issues them in as little as a day. But it still won't let in an Irish comedian who defends women from transgender extremes. So I'll talk to Graham Linehan. Plus, the Prime Minister today dodges a debate with Peter Dutton on nuclear power. Is he scared? And Labor's new plan to make richer Australians pay more for their aged care. Also tonight, proof to those figures that journalists keep repeating about all those innocent Palestinian women and children being killed by Israel, they're made up. And plenty more, including the very political Oscars yesterday. But first, if the Prime Minister's plan to spend another $4 billion would really fix Aboriginal disadvantage, I would say yes. But what Anthony Albanese announced today is $4 billion to make poverty permanent. It is such a disaster, driven by blind ideology. Albanese today announced the federal and Northern Territory government will spend $4 billion over 10 years to build up to 270 houses a year for Aborigines. And this was how to get Aboriginal children in school, Aboriginal adults in great jobs.
The first step in that, before you can address health problems, before you can address getting kids to school and getting people educated and getting people the opportunity of a good, well-paying, secure job, is a secure roof over someone's head. In fact, the critical thing about these houses is where you build them. And that is the problem. These houses will be in remote communities where there's almost no work, no good, well-paying jobs, and few role models for the children to show them what getting an education, going to school, could lead to. And this really then is part of a destructive leftist fantasy that traditional Aboriginal ways are best, to pay for Aborigines to live out bush as kind of museum exhibits, even though statistics are clear. Aborigines in remote areas are the most likely to suffer terrible rates of unemployment, domestic violence, children skipping schools. It's in the cities where Aboriginal living standards are highest. So these houses will keep Aborigines exactly where their children have least hope. It dooms another generation to live in poverty. Now, note, I said the same when John Howard, a Liberal, was Prime Minister too. I told him to his face after he went to Wadeye in remote Northern Territory to promise millions to get that town on its feet, to give children a future. I warned that he could put gold taps in every home there and it would stay a welfare ghetto. And indeed, since then, riots and a killing in Wadeye 2 years ago, 37 homes trashed or burned down, 400 locals fled to the bush for safety, more violence and attacks on police there 3 months ago. And now Albanese is spending $4 billion more on this kind of mirage. And look at the cost. For a start, the Northern Territory Chief Minister says this $4 billion is going to help 10,000 Aborigines. That is $400,000 for every single man, woman and child. There's seriously no better way to spend $400,000 a person on these people to help them. This package also means spending each year $400 million to build up to 270 houses. More maths, that works out to almost $1.5 million for every home. That's 3 times the price of building an average home, according to Bureau of Statistics data. And again, Albanese today couldn't see that problem. We've built in the factors of inflation that occurs over a 10-year period, but it's also we want to make sure as well that we're providing employment and skills and that upgrade as we're going. These homes, we're looking at 3-bedroom homes on average. Many of them, of course, are in very remote communities is what we're looking at, and with that comes additional costs. We accept that.
He could instead use that money to build 3 times more houses in Sydney, where there's a real housing crisis, and real jobs. But here we go, spending it instead where there's no work and no future. Albanese's plan is just giving failure a home. But let's hear from a man who has spent decades on advising on how to get work and wealth into Aboriginal communities. Warren Mundine is a former National Labor Party president and advisor to 2 Liberal Prime Ministers, and was a leader of last year's No campaign against The Voice. Thanks for joining me, Warren. Look, I don't actually know your opinion
pleasure.
on this, so you may well be contradicting me. $4 billion over 10 years to build up to 270 houses a year for Aborigines in the outback, many in remote areas. Is that a good plan that's going to get Aborigines good, well-paying jobs?
No, no, it's not. It's another one of these idiotic ideas that have always come out of the last 50 years in this area. You know, the referendum was, and the Australian people spoke very clearly about it, was we want to stop all this nonsense that goes on. We want accountability and dollars better spent, and that we're going to create, you know, situations where our communities are safe, where people can get a job, and where people could own their own home. Why is the federal government spending $4 billion on houses that will be, you know, they'll be useless in a few years' time, and then they'll be spending another $4 billion? This is the history of Indigenous affairs in this country. Instead of learning the lessons of, okay, how do you get economic development? How do you get kids to school? How do you make communities safe? How do you make organisations that are accountable for the dollars that are spent, so we get the right outcomes, focused on outcomes, rather than this nonsense? You know, this is just the same old stuff we've been doing for 50 years.
So what would you do instead?
Oh, it's very simple. You know, it's not rocket science to work out that the only way you build communities is when you got communities, beliefs in that community, you got jobs in that community, you got businesses in that community, and you got projects that people can live off. You know, they got a number of big projects in the Northern Territory which is being held up at the moment. You know, the Northern Territory, when you look at it through the energy and the mining industry, could be just as good as Western Australia. And it could be pulling in billions of dollars that could be providing the jobs and providing the infrastructure for the development of the Northern Territory and getting people into jobs, not only Aboriginal people, but everyone into jobs. But the problem they have is that they always fall back on the federal government. They always, you know, come out and hand out a few dollars here and hand out a few dollars there, and that's all they do. You know, this is just a nonsense. You know, Madeleine King said earlier this year, we want to get Aboriginals to own their own home. How is this owning your own home when it's just $4 billion worth of government money that's going to be out there, and you can't own your own home if you don't have a job and you're not fully employed?
Look, I don't get it either, Warren. It's just such a shame. It's fool's gold, and thinking that the future is in the remote parts of Australia, when families like your forebears, your Aboriginal forebears, and that of many successful Aborigines, it lies in the cities. I want to show you something.
Yeah, just before you go and show me that, I just want to say, what that Prime Minister just said was just nonsense. You've got to get kids into school today. You've got to build safe communities today, not waiting until you build, you know, $4 billion worth of houses.
That is, well, on that exact point, Warren, I want to show you a film shot by the Australians Liam Mendes in Alice Springs. We've done a bit this week on the explosion of violence again in Alice Springs. And I want to ask you, after you've seen this, whether building new houses in the remote parts of the Northern Territory is going to fix what Liam Mendes shot. Here he is.
Another day, another stolen car in Alice. As you can see behind me, it's about 4 a.m. and there's a gang of youths armed with a baseball bat and they're just doing... Oh, that was close. Thought they were going to come and attack us. I've been standing here with the security who have been monitoring this car, but there's not much that they can do. There's no police at all. Still quite a few people walking around, many of them intoxicated.
Now, Liam Medner's posted that just today. Warren, new houses in the far outback, is that going to fix it?
This is not going to or get law and order back into these communities. Look, this is Alice Springs, probably the second largest town or city in the Northern Territory, and look at it. You know, I got a person who used to work for me, went back home, she comes from Darwin, and she says it's just dreadful what's happening up there. You know, he's got to stop lying to the Australian public, stop pretending that he's doing things, and actually start getting police, working with the Northern Territory Police, getting them to do things and start dealing with these issues. And the courts need and the politicians need to be supporting them. You cannot get any economic development happening while you've got people who are riding and stealing cars and running into shops and causing problems, massive problems. It's about time these useless, that's what they are, useless politicians actually started doing things that actually work.
Warren Mundine, thank you so much indeed for your time. I should point out that footage of those people, those kids in the stolen car was shot at 4 a.m. and you wonder where their parents were. Irish comedy writer Graham Linehan, you've seen him on the show earlier this year, was supposed to be in Australia today on a speaking tour. It's supposed to be last week, but no visa, not yet, and maybe not ever.
Just come out of Heathrow. They're not letting me on the plane. Even though it took me a second to get a visa for New Zealand, my Australian visa, which is supposed to take a day usually, has now been held up for about 2 weeks. And yeah, they're not even letting me on the plane.
That was a couple of weeks ago. And still no visa. Linehan first applied for a business visitor activity visa. He even confirmed it was the correct one with an immigration lawyer. That should have taken just a day. Nothing. Then he applied for a 408 visa, allowing him to work. That should have taken an average of 15 calendar days to come through. Today is the 17th day. We've asked the Immigration Department and the Immigration Minister why they're stuffing around. No explanation. Can't discuss individual cases, they say. Although the Minister a few minutes ago added, when applying for a visa, individuals must declare all criminal conduct, truthfully answer all questions and provide all requested information. What is he implying? I can guarantee you the Department, the Home Affairs Department, could approve this visa as quick and as slow as they like. Maybe even 1 hour. But let me guess, Linehan's already lost his brilliant TV career and his marriage because of his opinions about transgender politics. I think that's the catch. Now, as I said before, this man could mock the Catholic Church by writing his famous Father Ted TV series, and no one at all silenced him for that.
But that used to be quite common, you know. The favourite son would become a doctor, and then the idiot brother would be sent off to the priesthood.
Your brother's a doctor, isn't he?
Yes.
Linehan followed up with his Father Ted series with another hit, Black Books and the IT Crowd. And then he got cancelled for saying, well, women-born women are different from women-born men and they shouldn't have to, say, compete with them in sport. And we were pushing confused children too hard into changing their gender instead of dealing with the real problems. And I wonder, is that why he hasn't got his visa? And yet this is a government that's given 2,000 visas to Palestinians from terrorist-run Gaza and the West Bank since the war started there in October 7, sometimes giving them in just 1 day. But there's not a visa for this comedian after a month. I was joined a short while ago by Graham Linehan in Auckland on his tour. Graham Linehan, thank you so much for joining me. When were you supposed to be in Australia?
I think I was supposed to be in Friday night, late Friday night, about a week ago now. Yeah, we were told that a visa usually takes a day or just a little bit longer, and it's been, I don't know, I think it's been more like a month by now. So we had to change our first date. I had to come straight to New Zealand, which did give me the visa in a day. In fact, I think it was about half an hour. And yeah, here I am, waiting to come, waiting to either be told that I can or can't come into your country.
This is extraordinary, Graham. You must be a very dangerous man, because this government was giving visas to people in Gaza within a day of application. In some cases, a day. People in Gaza, terrorist-run area, but for you, a comedian from Britain, you haven't got a yes and you haven't got a no after all these weeks. Do you find that rather extraordinary?
I do. Even now, the idea that the most dangerous people in the world are people who support women's rights and oppose the mutilation and sterilization of children in gender clinics. I find it astonishing that we're being kept from, putting on live events, from being heard, or, my book is hidden by activists in bookshops. It'll never fail to amaze me. It's the most astonishing time to be alive. Even though New Zealand was very easy for me to get into, I was still met by 2 policemen at the airport, and the whole thing is just surreal. It really is like going from writing sitcoms to being in one,
You were met by 2 policemen at the New Zealand airport. What was that about?
Well, I guess there must have. I guess my name now, just appearing on a ticket, must be flagged up, and they were very polite. Luckily, they were TED fans, so they were laughing at everything I said, even though I wasn't trying to be funny, which is always a good sign. But they were very sweet, and they just kind of spirited me through the airport. But it was a little bit, they immediately kind of reassured me when they saw me. They said, "Nothing's wrong, don't worry." Because the idea of heading back after a 20-hour flight was pretty traumatic. But no, they just wanted to make sure that they were aware of my movements, so that if there was any trouble, they could step in. I think the experience they had with Kelly J. Keane last year, where her visit was just met with extraordinary violence and aggression, has kind of made them realize that maybe they need to understand this issue a little bit better. So my time here so far has been just wonderful,
Yes, what was done to her, Kelly J. Keane, was just, in New Zealand in particular, was absolutely disgraceful. In fact, a thug that punched one of her supporters in the face, a 71-year-old woman, 3 times in the face, didn't even get a conviction recorded against him, and his name's been suppressed. I mean, it's just extraordinary. But Australia, is Australia the only country in the world so far that has denied you, not denied you, but simply not got around to giving you a visa to come and say what you want to say?
Yeah. I mean, I've never had a problem before. I don't know. And just once I would like a single person to tell me what I am saying that is so controversial. Single-sex spaces for women have been in position for 100 years. Everyone agrees that women's sports should be fair and that male cheats shouldn't be entering them. The WPATH files, which have just been released, is a 242-page report showing that so-called trans health care is endangering the people it's being used on. So what am I saying that's so dangerous? What am I saying that's so evil that I have to jump through all these hoops to just enter a country? No one will tell me. No one will tell me. So again, it's a slightly Kafkaesque situation that I find myself in, where my voice is being suppressed, even though no one can tell me what my voice is saying that is so offensive.
Well, Graham Lennon, you're a man of the world. You've been in controversy for a long time. Can you give us, in 1 sentence, 2 sentences maybe, the line that you think would most scare the Australian government into not giving you a visa that Australian audiences are now going to miss out on? Try to smuggle in your message through this show that that the government's trying to censor. What is it that's so dangerous that they don't want our audience to hear?
It's very simple. Women's rights are human rights. That's it.
Well, that's terrifying. I'll try to... I hope this doesn't get censored, this show. Let's see. We'll see. You've said it, Graham. Dangerous stuff. I can see why the government's in panic, why the Minister for Immigration is hiding under his desk. I think Canberra is shaking, but there it is. We're always trying to get our audience the best that's thought and said, and sometimes not even the best that's thought and said. But thank you so much, mate. I think it's a disgrace what's happening to you. I apologise, not that it's any my fault, but mate, we have got a government that you wouldn't believe. Thank you so much for persevering.
Thank you. And I do hope I get to visit.
Break. Now, after the break, Malcolm Turnbull trashes Donald Trump in America and Australia as a fanboy of dictators and killers like Vladimir Putin. Does he? Is that right? I'll talk to a man who worked with Trump in the White House about that and about Trump being sledged at the Oscars. You know, there is one thing that does worry a lot of people about Donald Trump, including me, even though I do want him to become president again of the United States if the alternative is Joe Biden. Why does Trump say so many nice things about dictators and strongmen like Russian President Vladimir Putin, the war criminal? Like these examples from before Putin invaded Ukraine.
We just left Moscow. He could not have been nicer. He was so nice and so everything, but you have to give him credit.
Russia is like, I mean, they're really hot stuff.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin.
He's running this country, and at least he's a leader, you know, unlike what we have in this country.
And he's going to go in and be a peacekeeper.
Well, our former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, for the last couple of weeks here and in America, has also been putting in the boot.
When you see Trump with Putin, as I have on a few occasions, he's like the 12-year-old boy that goes to high school and meets the captain of the football team. My hero. It is really creepy. It's really creepy now.
Joining me is Sean Spicer, the first White House spokesman of the then President Donald Trump. Sean Spicer, thanks for your time. Sean, I don't normally credit CNN as a good source for anything, but can I quote from a story that's just published? To Donald Trump, Hungarian strongman Viktor Orban is fantastic. Chinese leader Xi Jinping is brilliant. North Korea's Kim Jong-un is an okay guy. But most alarmingly, allegedly said Adolf Hitler did some good things, multiple former senior advisors told CNN. The sources it quotes on the record are former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly and National Security Advisor John Bolton. Are they right? Is Donald Trump admiring dictators and autocrats a little too much?
Well, first of all, I've never personally heard him use any of those kind of words with respect to the people that you just mentioned. But let's just say that two things can be true at the same time. Somebody can be a very smart person, but be very evil or mean, do very bad things. Right. And so there's a difference. How Trump is describing them, if you take things out of context, I can say I really like such, or I think so-and-so is a smart person, but they do bad things. As I said, let's be clear. I mean, two things can be true at the same time. And the context in which these things said is important, which, of course, these quotes are lacking.
Well, that's actually true. John Kelly was claiming that Donald Trump admired Hitler's economic policies. I'm not sure I would at all, but that's not to say he admired the Holocaust or the war or anything like that. So I think you're quite right in that respect. But to the broader point, particularly with Donald Trump's admiration of Vladimir Putin in the past, is he a little too inclined to admire strongmen?
Well, look, whether he admires them or not, and again, it's all relative to the aspects, the qualities that he's telling about. Like, you can say somebody's tough and strong. That doesn't mean it's a good quality. It's just maybe a reality of the situation. But more importantly, look at this is what I think gets lost in this, Andrew. Look at the foreign policy under the 4 years of Donald Trump versus the 3 years of Joe Biden. Regardless of what he thought about Vladimir Putin, for the first time in how many administrations, Vladimir Putin didn't annex or go to war with any of his neighbors during the 4 years of Trump, right? So you can say what you will about what Trump thinks about him, but the reality is that for 4 years, we had a Russia that was contained. For 4 years, we had a much better relationship with North Korea in terms of them releasing hostages, not being as provocative as they are now. China was much more contained. In fact, I think President Xi was on his heels the entire time, not wondering what Donald Trump would do, trying to be concerned about the policies in the act. China was much more defensive than they are now with Joe Biden, admitting that calling out the Biden administration, admitting that they have full-on plans to take over Taiwan. If not, it's not a question of if, but when, growing more provocative in both military and economic fronts. So this is a distraction, frankly, I think, from the reality of what matters to America. Are we safe? Are we more prosperous? Are we trading more? Are our interests being protected?
President Biden is sounding more anti-Israeli by the day. He started off as a firm supporter of Israel, as you know. This week has attacked Israel's Prime Minister for going too far, allegedly, in the war with the Hamas terrorist group. Here he is.
He must pay more attention to the innocent lives being lost as a consequence of the actions taken.
Now, why the change in tone, Sean? And add to that, why doesn't Donald Trump now exploit this change by showing firm support for Israel and really wedging Joe Biden?
Yeah, to answer the latter first, I wish he would. This is definitely an issue where I think Republican strength, and this goes back to what I said a moment ago, could really point out the contrast that exists. So that's number one. Number two, let's be clear to what the president said. The only people who took innocent lives to begin this conflict was Hamas. Like, they attacked Israel unprovoked, killed innocent civilians, took women and children as hostages and still maintain them. Frankly, still maintain U.S. citizens as hostages. Where's the president? I didn't hear one iota. I haven't heard anything, and frankly, probably well over a month, about the concern for U.S. citizens. He's more concerned about the retaliatory strike that U.S. is having, that Israel's having on the people that attack them unprovoked. Look, you asked what's causing this. The bottom line is this: electoral politics are what the issue is. Joe Biden flip-flopped again. He used to be a very big supporter of Israel until he realized that places like Michigan were getting put into play because he has, his support for Israel was undermining his electoral strategy in a key state. And also with a key demographic, not just Arab and Muslim Americans, but younger Americans. So the reality is that this is Joe Biden playing politics. The old Joe Biden would have stood firm with Israel, but because, we're in an election year, he can't. And his base is creating massive problems for him.
Well, to the Academy Awards last night, I'm sure you were riveted to the screen, Sean, given your own starring role once at the Emmys. But Donald Trump posted a review online that host Jimmy Kimmel read out to the audience, which confirmed, I would suspect, for every single viewer that Hollywood is left-wing. Here is that exchange.
I just got a review, and has there ever been a worse host than Jimmy Kimmel at the Oscars? His opening was that of a less-than-average person trying too hard to be something which he is not and never can be. Get rid of Kimmel and perhaps replace him with another washed-up but cheap ABC talent, George Slopanopoulos. He would make everybody on stage look bigger, stronger, and more glamorous, blah, 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 make America great again. Thank you, President Trump. Thank you for watching. I'm surprised you're still watching. Isn't it past your jail time?
Sean Spicer, your reaction to that?
I wish he wouldn't give them the bait. Look, first of all, I didn't watch the Oscars. Last thing I want to do is add my one vote by watching it to somehow affirming the need to care what Hollywood thinks about themselves. So I don't tune into shows like that. Even if it just makes me feel better not to watch it. But secondly, I think the president, gives them something to go off. I wish he wouldn't. do it. I get that's who he is. He can't help himself sometimes. But look, it's no surprise that he's a big movie buff, and I'm sure he wanted to see who won. But, you know, look, Hollywood is owned by the left, as you pointed out. They hate folks on the right, especially what we stand for. They suppress content of stuff that frankly does much better than it talks about Sound of Freedom. There's a new movie, Cabrini, out. All these movies that actually are good, wholesome movies, they suppress. They don't really care about. I'm glad he called him out to some degree, but I wish he wouldn't give him the fodder to do that.
It cuts across the more presidential tone he's been trying to adopt lately.
Yeah, when it comes to that, I think that's long gone. I think Donald Trump's got his own style. It's unique to who he is. I think that's why a lot of people love him, because he will do it. But, you know, every once in a while, I feel like you're just giving them what they want. And so for that reason, again, it is who he is. It's how he became the success that he did in politics, because he speaks his mind. But, you know, every once in a while, I just go, you know, don't let them get the better of you.
Sean Spicer, no doubt you thought that once, more than once, when you were his spokesman, making your life just that little bit harder at the time. Thank you so much for your time here.
You bet, Andrew.
After the break, what is the Prime Minister so scared of? He today dodged this challenge from the opposition leader to a debate on nuclear power.
I'll meet him at the press club or wherever he wants at any time.
Now I'll show you the Prime Minister's weak response, but also, yes, I'll tell you about a good Labor idea. Or am I wrong? Coming up, the panel on why the Prime Minister is dodging a Peter Dutton challenge today. But first, here's a quick look at what's coming up on Shari.
Thanks, Andrew. Well, tonight we're unmasking the woman accused of orchestrating a violent kidnapping. Police say she drove a man towards 3 others who allegedly tied him up with duct tape and beat him with a hammer. I have all the details at 8.
I have something to say about that case too soon. Here is the most frightening paragraph I read in today's newspapers. In the Sydney Morning Herald, in a report on modelling by energy consultancy Green Energy Markets, they're global warming believers, on the Albanese government's plan to replace our coal-fired generators with wind and solar power. I read that this modelling worked out that 32 gigawatts of new generation of wind and solar is required to achieve the government's 2030 target, but only 23 gigawatts looks like being built, and that, it says, would leave a 9 gigawatt gap. So we would have only 2/3 of the new green electricity we need in just 6 years from now. Now, something will turn up, we're told. Maybe the states will chip in. I mean, is that really how you run a 21st century economy? So all the more ridiculous that the government just blindly rejects the opposition's plan to drop this irrational ban on nuclear power. Opposition leader Peter Dutton today challenged the Prime Minister to debate him on this, but Anthony Albanese refused.
We need a clear pathway. It's why the Prime Minister should stand up and debate with me the issue of nuclear and energy in this country. I'll meet him at the press club or wherever he wants.
So now he's saying we'll have big nuclear reactors. He's not saying where they're going to be. He's not saying who will pay for them. He's not saying how long it will take.
So why not debate it?
Except,
why don't you debate it?
Well, it's thin air.
Joining me is my Tuesday panel, Will Kingston, host of Australiana, a weekly podcast from The Spectator on politics and culture, and Danica DiGiorgio, host of our new chat show, The Jury, every Sunday here at Sky at 8 p.m. and on primetime Fridays at 7 p.m. Danica, should Albanese debate Peter Dutton on nuclear power?
Well, Andrew, it's a no-brainer. Of course he should be debating Peter Dutton on nuclear power. We need to have some debate in this country about how we're going to keep the lights on. And there's Albo today with his Akubra in complete denial once again. And he constantly tells us, well, you know, nuclear is not going to work here in Australia, yet doesn't actually have any evidence to suggest that that is the case. How is it that nuclear works so well in 31 other countries around the world, the UK, the US and Japan, Yet apparently it's not good enough here. Yet this renewables push is costing us billions of dollars. Electricity bills are still going up and they are still unreliable. I mean, look here in New South Wales late last year in the middle of a heat wave, we were told here in Sydney to turn off our dishwashers, turn off our washing machines because the grid simply wouldn't cope. AEMO has already warned that Australia will not be able to build and install enough renewable energy generation to meet that 2030 target. And yet, Andrew, as we know, we have some of the world's largest reserves of uranium just sitting here waiting to be used. So yes, Albanese should be out there debating. It is something we need. We need to have this discussion. It's inevitable.
All right, that was too easy. The question was too easy, so I'll have to ask Will the hard one. Will, for 10 to 30 years now, maybe longer, we've been told it's going to take too long to get nuclear industry up. Is it realistic when we're now told again it'll take anything from 10 to 30 years to get going?
Well, at the same time, Andrew, they're telling us that the potential harms of climate change will be here in 50 to 100 years' time. So to me, 10 to 15 years to get a nuclear reactor up and running seems like a pretty good bet. Look, the people who don't like to debate their beliefs are religious fanatics, and this is a religion for the left in Australia. They'll tell you that it will take too long, despite the fact that the harms will take considerably longer to arrive. They'll tell you it's about cost, and yet at the same time, the left doesn't care about the costs of anything. More debate is a good thing in a democracy, and I suspect that debate would lead to a reasonable position that nuclear is a part of an energy mix and it mitigates risk if other parts of that energy mix don't work. We're not going to get to that point because this is purely about ideology for Albanese. It's about dogma. It's not about pragmatism.
Well, let me stay with you for a sec, because we both had a kick of the Albanese government. I need to prove that I'm even-handed. We're an ageing society and providing all this aged home care for the future, all those extra aged care homes, going to cost us an extra $30 billion over the decade, we're told. Government's new review into this says the fairest way to pay for all that is to make better off Australians pay more for their aged care. More than 25% they have to pay today for residential care and just 5% for at-home care. What do you reckon? Good idea?
Good idea that doesn't go far enough, Andrew. I think it's outrageous that we think about aged care as some sort of entitlement as opposed to a last gasp safety net. You shouldn't be able to take money off the government for aged care services and then pass down a house and assets and a big inheritance to your kids. I don't think we as Australians recognise the looming catastrophe of the increased cost of aged care in this country, and we're going to need to do drastic things as we have a rapidly ageing population and lagging economic productivity. This, I think, is a good start. But again, we need to change the mentality from this being a benefit to being something which is very much the last resort.
Okay, that's 2 ticks for a Labor idea. Is it 3 from you, Danica?
Look, I do like this policy, Andrew, and just going off that, in the end, we are facing an ageing population. It is going to cost the taxpayer a lot of money. And in fact, that latest report that came out found that over the next 40 years, the number of people over 80 is actually set to triple to more than $3.5 million. What I will say, though, is if you are going to be forking out your own money to pay for your aged care, then you expect that the services will be just as good. And right now we have a situation in this country where, while we are trying to work with providers to bring the standards up, there are a number of restrictions right now on providers to provide very good care, which is absolutely understandable, but they just simply don't have the workforce. They don't have the people available to meet those demands right now. So you should be able to get what you pay for. The only other thing I would say is that this needs to be means tested because I'm not sure what the government would define as who is wealthy.
Oh, that's that decision they put off for the future. That's when it gets hard. Will, I think there's something I'm missing here. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has publicly apologised for posting a Photoshop picture of herself with the 3 children, a picture that news agency killed and refused to send. She said, like many amateur photographers, I do occasionally experiment with editing. I wanted to express my apologies for any confusion the family photograph we shared yesterday caused. Hope everyone celebrating had a very happy Mother's Day. Now, is this the big scandal I keep reading about? The crisis of credibility for the palace? Oh my God, how can we trust anything they do again?
In and of itself, no. But I'll tell you what, Andrew, just before coming on air, I watched a eulogy delivered by Christopher Hitchens for Alexei Navalny. Despite the fact, as your audience would know, that Hitchens died many years ago, the age of deep fakes, the age of doctored images, and the age of AI being able to change what we see and hear is upon us. So whilst I think this issue probably isn't a big deal, the bigger issue is of the way that we consume information. And if the media is calling that out, then that's probably a good thing.
I think that's true too. Just quickly, Danica, I'm out of time, but just what do you make of this? What have I missed?
I actually disagree with Will. I think this just goes to show fake news. How are we supposed to believe anything that comes out of the palace from now on? If they wanted to put out a proper photo, get an independent photographer. I find it very difficult to believe that Princess Kate is sitting there, Andrew, on her weekends, scrolling through, these apps to try and change photos, adjusting the hands, adjusting her children's jumpers, the rocks on the floor. I mean, it's ridiculous. As if she's doing that. It's just not plausible to me. I don't think it's a scandal, but I think it's an absolute PR disaster for the Royals.
Thank you to you both, Will Kingston, Danica DiGiorgio. Thank you very much. After the break, proof that those figures you're told about all the people killed by Israeli soldiers, proof that it's fake. You're being fooled. And the shocking background of those red-hand lapel badges actors were wearing the Oscars yesterday to call for an end to the war. Do they know what that badge actually means in the Middle East? US President Joe Biden said something stupid last week, and I've got to ask journalists too. Gaza is run by Hamas, a terrorist group that deliberately slaughtered Jewish babies, raped women, took hostages. Why would you believe that rapists and baby killers wouldn't lie? That Hamas now tells the truth when it claims Israel has so far killed some 21,000 innocent Palestinian women and children. That's true, it has killed too many women and children. It's fighting a terrorist army that hides among civilians. But why does even Biden repeat Hamas's claims without question?
This war has taken a greater toll on innocent civilians than all previous wars in Gaza combined. More than 30,000 Palestinians have been killed, most of whom are not Hamas. Thousands and thousands of innocent women and children, girls and boys, also orphaned.
Those Hamas figures can't be right. I mean, how can the death toll early in the war rise in an almost straight line as if there are never periods of less intensive combat? That looks fake. And how could 70% of the dead be women and children? That's a huge propaganda point for Hamas, of course, and its useful idiots in the Western media.
These are tiny figures of children on the walls of our studio, one for almost each of the 12,800 kids who have died in Gaza, according to numbers from Gaza's Health Ministry.
No, just think. Israel reckons it's killed, 12,000 Hamas terrorists. But Hamas has said, an official told Reuters last month, it was 6,000. Well, let's split the difference and say 9,000 Hamas terrorists killed. Yet here Hamas officially claims around 9,000 men in total have died in Gaza, which must mean that every single man killed by Israel was in fact a Hamas terrorist. Not one was a civilian. Not one teacher, shopkeeper, health worker, driver, cripple was killed. And that clearly doesn't make sense. How could Israel in this war kill about 21,000 women and children, but not one male civilian? These figures lie. Hamas lies. And speaking of, and back to the Oscars yesterday, so many of the stars, or almost stars, were little badges showing a bloody hand. They say that shows they want a permanent ceasefire in the war between Israel and Hamas, which is what Hamas wants. But as the Israeli government has pointed out, that red hand in that part of the world, in the Middle East, is associated with one horrific event: the torture, dismemberment and slaughter of 2 Israelis by Palestinians in Ramallah 24 years ago, with the killers then cheering the Palestinian crowd by showing their bloody hands. Is this a coincidence? Joining me on Culture Wars is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australia and host of Outsiders on Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m. It's a must not miss. Rowan, thanks for your time. How did Hollywood turn so anti-Israel? Because I didn't notice any actors wearing yellow ribbons for the more than 100 Jewish hostages still held by Hamas 5 months later.
It's very depressing, Andrew, and these idiot celebrities who wander around. I mean, what sort of a moron would you have to be to pick up a badge which has a bloody or a red hand on it? I mean, anybody who's ever watched Peaky Blinders knows the theme song is a red right hand is a symbol of murder. A red bloodied hand is a symbol of having killed someone. And that's exactly what the red hand arguably here represents. You mentioned the 2000 lynching of two Jewish guys who happened to wander into the Palestinian area by mistake. They got picked up by the Palestinian Authority police and taken to a police station, and an angry mob tore into the police station and lynched and murdered these two. To their credit, some of the Palestinian police tried to stop the murder from taking place. But what this tells us, endlessly we keep being told by the left, oh, history didn't begin on October 7th. No, that's quite right. History did not begin on October 7th. Hamas have been murdering Jews, Palestinian activists and terrorists have been murdering Jews since 1948 and earlier. And the 2000 lynching was just one of a long line of innocent Jews being murdered, tortured, abducted, by Palestinian terrorists, activists, and so on. The Hamas Charter explicitly calls for the death of every Jew in Israel. So this should come as no surprise to people that Hamas want to murder Jews. So if you support the pro-Palestinian activism without explicitly distancing yourself from the horrors of October 7th, I'm afraid in my book, you are complicit with urging more terror, more horror, more abductions, more rapes. And this is why it is abhorrent that the Teals and Labor and the Greens in this country want to start refunding UNRWA, which has direct, proven links to the terrorism of Hamas. This is why it is appalling that we have activists at the Oscars standing up and showing, I'm sure we'll talk about him in a second, but showing unequivocal support for the Palestinian side of the argument at this point in history, unless you are actively showing your support and demonstrating your active support for the Jews and Israelis in this conflict. I'm afraid you are on the side of the other side, unless you explicitly say that you are not. And I think it is a horror show what is going on around the world at the moment.
Rowan, I do want to come back to a speech that you pointed out in the Oscars yesterday, but I quickly want to touch on, if we've got time, breaking news this afternoon about two pro-Palestinian activists. A Melbourne court has finally partially lifted suppression orders so we can identify now the woman and man who allegedly kidnapped and tortured a man, broke his fingers for reasons I cannot speculate. One is Mohammed Sharab, here in his keffiyeh, which is worn by pro-Palestinian activists, of course, with a megaphone. The other is Laura Alam, who shared a platform with Green Senator Mehreen Faruqi at an anti-Israel protest and has posted Hamas, listed here as a terrorist group, should be welcomed in every single Arab nation as they take on the Middle Eastern enemy. There's more she's posted I cannot legally show, unfortunately. Rowan, let's not comment on this case. This is before the courts. But tell me instead what you thought of other pro-Palestinian activists who have desecrated, for instance, the Anzac Memorial in Canberra, defacing with graffiti, and added that Australia, this colony, must fall. What does it say about their cause?
Well, what it says is that we've been hoodwinked over what multiculturalism was really all about. The majority of people who migrate to this country come here because it's a better country than the one they've left, and they want to contribute and become Australian. But Labor and the left deliberately had a policy of not integrating people from other countries. So you have these pockets of people who would prefer import the hatreds, the prejudices, the nastiness, the horrors, the murders, the attitudes from other cultures into this country. And because we refuse to recognise that assimilation is critical, you have pockets of people who carry on as if they are still in the Middle East or wherever it might be. And this is the failure of the multicultural experiment. That's what it is, Andrew.
I think that's well said. And I would also add that it seems to me to indicate that a lot of the pro-Palestinian protesters seem at war with Western society. Once again, the Jews are the canary in the coal mine in this regard. Rowan, I'm sorry we haven't got to a topic that you want to talk about. Hope to do it later. Thank you so much for your time. Well, that's it from me. But Shari, coming up now.